The sound of my suitcase being kicked across the hardwood floor echoes through the hallway of the house I bought for my daughter. My hands tremble as I watch Becky, my precious child whom I raised for 30 years, standing there with contempt in her eyes. The same eyes that once looked at me with pure love when I first found her. A tiny 1-year-old abandoned in a dumpster on the outskirts of San Antonio. "You're nothing but a burden now," she spits out, her designer dress a stark contrast to my worn-out uniform. "If you want to stay here, you better find work as a caregiver or something. We're not feeding you for free." Behind her, Eleanor Brooks, my daughter's mother-in-law, watches with that familiar academic superiority she's always worn like expensive perfume. Matthew, my son-in-law, stands silent, his arm around Becky's waist, reinforcing the wall they've built between us. I'm 58 years old, and until yesterday I thought I knew what heartbreak felt like. I was wrong. When Richard, my ex-husband, gave me an ultimatum to choose between him or my newly adopted daughter, the choice was clear as day. The years of working triple shifts as a waitress, housekeeper, and craftswoman to pay for Becky's heart surgeries and medications, those weren't sacrifices to me. They were acts of love. But now, as I stand in this beautiful house that I purchased for them, with every penny I saved from my years as Isabella Harrington's housekeeper, I feel something different, something deeper than heartbreak, something that makes me straighten my spine despite the arthritis that settled in after decades of manual labor. "I gave you everything," Becky continues, her voice rising. "You owe me everything you have. Look at you. Just a maid who couldn't even keep her pension. The Texas State Pension Fund collapsed. And now you think you can just come here and live off us?" A small smile plays at the corners of my mouth, though they can't see it. In my purse lies a secret that would shock them all. The documentation of an $8 million account. Isabella's final gift to me for 28 years of loyalty. I'd been saving it for Becky's future, but now... "You're right," I say quietly, picking up my kicked suitcase. "I should never have come here, expecting kindness. The weight of the moment settles around us like dust after a storm. 3 decades of sacrifice, love, and devotion reduced to this. My own daughter treating me like something scraped off the bottom of her expensive shoes. As I turn to leave, I catch my reflection in the hallway mirror. Gone is the uncertain woman who knocked on this door hoping for shelter. In her place stands someone else, someone who's finally ready to write her own story. I walk out into the warm Texas evening, leaving behind the house I bought with my savings. But I'm taking with me something far more valuable. The realization that it's time for Maggie Foster to live for herself. The night I found Becky remains etched in my memory like a photograph that never fades. It was during my evening shift at Mario's Diner, taking out the trash before closing. The December wind whipped through San Antonio's streets, and that's when I heard it. A soft whimper coming from the dumpster in the alley. I grew up in orphanages, bouncing between foster homes that never quite became family. Maybe that's why my hands moved before my mind could process what I was doing. There she was, wrapped in a thin blanket, her tiny body trembling from cold and hunger. Her eyes, though, those eyes looked straight into mine with a trust that shattered every wall I'd built around my heart. Richard, my husband then, wasn't as easily convinced. "Maggie, we can't just keep a baby we found in the trash," he said, pacing our small apartment. But I'd already made my decision. I'd spent my childhood watching other children get chosen while I remained behind, and I wasn't about to let this little girl experience that pain. The adoption process was grueling. I worked double shifts at the diner, picked up cleaning jobs on weekends, and sold handmade jewelry at local markets. every penny went into lawyer fees and paperwork. Richard complained about the mounting expenses, but when Becky finally became legally ours, I thought it was all worth it. Those early years were beautiful, despite their challenges. Becky had a heart condition that required regular medications and eventually surgery. I can still feel the weight of her tiny body against my chest as I rocked her through nights of fever and pain. The hospital bills were astronomical, but I took on a third job as an artisan, crafting decorative pieces for local boutiques during the few hours I should have been sleeping. When Richard delivered his ultimatum 2 years later, either the kid goes back to the system or I'm filing for divorce, I packed his bags myself. The look of betrayal on his face when I chose Becky over him still surfaces in my memories sometimes, but it's overshadowed by the image of my daughter's smile as she recovered from her first successful heart surgery. We moved into a tiny studio apartment after Richard left. I transformed our single room into a magical space for Becky, painting stars on the ceiling that glowed in the dark. During the day while I worked, she stayed with Mrs. Rodriguez, our elderly neighbor who taught her Spanish and fed her homemade enchiladas. At night, I'd come home exhausted but always found energy to read her stories, help with homework, or simply listen to her dreams. "Mama," she used to say, curled up in our shared bed, "when I grow up, I want to be just like you." I'd stroke her hair and whisper back, "No, my love, you're going to be so much more." I meant those words with every fiber of my being, every blister on my hands, every ache in my back, every missed hour of sleep. They were investments in her future, in her chance to rise above the circumstances of her beginning. Little did I know then that those same dreams I nurtured would one day become the weapon she'd use to break my heart. The first time I noticed the change in Becky was during her senior year at the University of Texas. I'd just finished my evening shift at Isabella Harrington's mansion, my bones aching from scrubbing floors when I received her call. She was crying about not having the right dress for a dinner with Matthew Brooks's family. "Mom, you don't understand," she sobbed. "Dr. Eleanor Brooks is going to be there. She's not just Matthew's mother. She's the head of the business ethics department. Everyone knows her name. I can't show up looking like..." The words hung in the air, unspoken, but clear. "Like your daughter." I glanced at my bank account on my ancient phone. The numbers stared back at me. Just enough for next month's rent and utilities. But I heard the desperation in her voice, the fear of not belonging, and I did what I'd always done. I drove to the bank at dawn and withdrew everything from my emergency fund. The dress cost well on $200. When I handed her the shopping bag outside her dormitory, Becky's eyes lit up just like they used to when she was little. For a moment, I saw my sweet girl again, not the increasingly distant young woman she was becoming. She hugged me quickly, then checked over her shoulder to make sure none of her classmates had seen us. "Thanks, Mom," she whispered. "But maybe next time you could just transfer the money? It's kind of embarrassing when people see..." She gestured vaguely at my uniform, still visible under my coat. That night, as I served dinner to Isabella Harrington and her guests, I couldn't stop thinking about Becky's words. Isabella must have noticed something was wrong, because she called me into her study afterward. "Margaret," she said, using my full name as she always did. "You've worked for me for 15 years now. I've watched you put every spare dollar into that girl's education. Tell me, does she appreciate what you've done for her?" I busied myself straightening the already perfect arrangement of roses on her desk. "She's just trying to fit into a different world," I defended. "The Brooks family. They have expectations." Isabella's eyes, sharp despite her age, studied me carefully. "And what about your expectations, Margaret? What about your dignity, But I wasn't ready to hear it then. I thought of Becky at the Brooks dinner party that evening, wearing that expensive dress, finally feeling like she belonged. What mother wouldn't want that for her child? The requests kept coming after that. A designer handbag to match Eleanor's, a summer internship that required a whole new wardrobe. Each time I told myself it was an investment in her future. I picked up extra shifts, sold my mother's antique locket, canceled my health insurance. When Becky and Matthew got engaged, Eleanor Brooks made it clear that the wedding needed to be appropriate to their social standing. I went to Isabella and asked for an advance on my salary. The first time I'd ever made such a request in all my years of service. Isabella signed the check without hesitation, but her words haunted me. Sometimes, Margaret, the more we give, the less they value what they receive. I watched Becky walk down the aisle in a gown that cost more than our old apartment's yearly rent. She looked like a princess, just as she'd dreamed. But when she introduced me to Matthew's college friends, she called me Margaret instead of Mom, and explained that I was more like a family friend who had helped raise her. That night, as I sat alone in my small rental room, surrounded by newspaper clippings of Becky's academic achievements and childhood photos, I felt something shift inside me. But I pushed the feeling down, telling myself that mothers don't keep score, that love means giving without expecting anything in return. I didn't know then that I was teaching her the wrong lesson, that my unconditional love was setting the stage for conditional respect. The day I decided to buy Becky and Matthew a house was also the day Isabella Harrington taught me my most important lesson, though I wouldn't understand it until much later. I was polishing the grand piano in her music room, the same piano she would eventually leave to me in her secret will, when she called me in for afternoon tea. It wasn't unusual for Isabella to invite me to join her. Over 28 years of service, she'd gradually shifted from employer to something closer to a friend, though we both maintained the comfortable boundaries of our positions. That day, her china cups clinked softly as she watched me explain my plan to empty my savings for Becky's new home. "And where will you live when you retire, Margaret?" she asked, her voice gentle but pointed. I remember laughing, the sound hollow even to my own ears. "I'll figure something out. I always do." "Yes," Isabella said, setting down her cup with deliberate care. "You always do. But I've observed something about you, Margaret. You're excellent at solving everyone's problems except your own." She then told me about her own daughter, Caroline, who had squandered 3 trust funds before passing away from an overdose. "I enabled her until the very end," Isabella confessed, her eyes distant. "I thought I was showing love, but I was actually feeding a darkness in her soul." I didn't want to hear the parallels then. Instead, I threw myself into house hunting with Paula Rogers, a young realtor who reminded me of myself at her age. Earnest, hard-working, often overlooked. When Samantha Brooks, Matthew's cousin, mocked Paula during a showing, suggesting she was wasting her time with the help, I pretended not to hear. I was used to such treatment. The house I chose for Becky and Matthew was perfect. A colonial-style home in Austin, with a wraparound porch and room for grandchildren, I imagined would one day call me Grandma. The day I handed them the keys, Becky hugged me tightly, and for a moment I felt like I had my little girl back. But that evening, as I served dinner at the Harrington mansion, Isabella noticed the slight tremor in my hands as I poured her wine. "You've given them the house, haven't you?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "They deserve a good start," I replied, straightening the silverware that didn't need straightening. Isabella's next words cut through my practiced defenses. "And what do you deserve, Margaret?" That night, alone in my small apartment, I found myself really looking at my reflection for the first time in years. My hands, rough from decades of work, had paid for Becky's heart surgeries, her private school tuition, her college degree, and now a house. Yet earlier that day at the closing, she had introduced me to the real estate agent as her childhood guardian, not her mother. I opened my jewelry box and took out the only photograph I had of the day I found her. Tiny Becky, wrapped in hospital blankets, her small hand gripping my finger. "You're my miracle," I had whispered to her then. Now, 30 years later, I whispered to my reflection, "When did loving you become permission to hurt me?" The question hung in the air of my apartment, unanswered but awakening something in me. The next morning, Isabella called me into her study before I began my duties. She handed me an envelope, sealed with her personal wax stamp. "Don't open this until after I'm gone," she said, her eyes holding mine with unusual intensity. "Consider it my way of balancing the scales." I tucked the envelope away, not knowing it contained the key to my future freedom. But something else had already begun to shift inside me. A quiet awakening, a realization that love shouldn't require the complete erasure of self. The day the Texas State Pension Fund collapsed, I was arranging flowers in Isabella Harrington's conservatory. The news came through my ancient phone, a simple text alert that represented the end of decades of careful planning. My hands trembled as I set down the crystal vase, watching as my retirement savings evaporated into digital nothingness. Isabella had passed away just 2 weeks before, and I hadn't yet opened the envelope she'd given me. I was still processing her loss, still adjusting to the silence of the mansion without her wise presence. The new housekeepers kept giving me sympathetic looks, knowing I'd been more than just an employee to her. "You should take some time off," they suggested. But I couldn't, not with my safety net suddenly gone. That evening, I sat in my small apartment, surrounded by newspaper clippings of Becky's achievements, her college graduation, her wedding announcement, her first job at a prestigious firm. My fingertips traced the envelope Isabella had given me, its wax seal still unbroken. Something held me back from opening it. Perhaps the same instinct that makes birds sense an approaching storm. I called Becky first, my fingers shaking as I dialed. Her voice was distracted when she answered, the sounds of a dinner party in the background. "Mom, I'm kind of in the middle of something," she said. "Eleanor and Matthew's colleagues are here." "The pension fund collapsed," I said quietly. "All of it's gone." There was a pause, then a rustle as she moved to a quieter space. "What? Do you mean gone? What about your savings?" "I used most of it for your house," I reminded her gently. "And before that, the surgeries, the schools. So what are you going to do?" Her voice had an edge to it now, more irritated than concerned. "I was hoping maybe I could stay with you for a little while, just until I figure something out. I could help with housework, cooking." The silence that followed felt like a physical weight. "Mom," she said finally, her voice taking on that tone she used when speaking to service staff. "You can come for a few days, but you'll need to find work. We can't support you indefinitely." I thought of all the nights I'd worked triple shifts to support her, of the dreams I'd sacrificed to fund hers. But instead of saying this, I just whispered, "Thank you." After hanging up, I walked to my bedroom mirror, the same one that had witnessed countless nights of me counting tips, planning budgets, calculating how to stretch dollars into dreams. For the first time, I really saw the woman staring back at me, gray streaks in her hair from years of worry, hands worn from endless labor, eyes tired from watching everyone else's happiness bloom while her own withered. That's when I finally broke Isabella's seal. The documents inside changed everything. $8 million, carefully invested and managed, waiting in an account with my name on it. Isabella's final gift, not just money, but a chance at dignity. A note fell from between the papers, written in her elegant hand. Margaret, my dear friend, I've watched you give everything to someone who has learned to take everything. Consider this my intervention. Use it wisely. Use it for yourself. I sat there for hours, holding those papers, thinking about the choice before me. I could tell Becky about the money, rescue her from ever having to be embarrassed by her mother again. Or... My phone buzzed with a text from her. BTW, when you come, use the side entrance. Eleanor's friends might be visiting. In that moment, something crystallized inside me, hard and clear as diamond. I understood what Isabella had been trying to tell me all those years. Sometimes love needs to be saved from itself. I began packing my small suitcase, but not for the reason Becky expected. As I folded each worn uniform, each faded dress, I felt lighter. The weight of decades of one-sided sacrifice was lifting, replaced by something unfamiliar but exhilarating. The possibility of freedom. I would go to Becky's house, yes, but not as a supplicant begging for shelter. I needed to see, one last time, exactly who my daughter had become when she thought I had nothing left to give. The suite at the Grand Palladian Hotel in Dallas felt like another world as I sank into the plush armchair by the floor-to-ceiling. Windows, still wearing my threadbare dress from Becky's house. I couldn't help but laugh at the contrast. 24 hours ago, I'd watched my own daughter kick my suitcase down a hallway. Now, I was sitting in a room that cost more per night than I used to make in 2 weeks. The first thing I did was take a bath in the marble tub, washing away decades of other people's expectations. Then I ordered room service, not the cheapest item on the menu, as I would have done before, but exactly what I wanted. As I ate my perfectly cooked salmon, I opened my laptop and began to plan. Your money needs to make a statement, Isabella had written in a second letter I found in the envelope. Not of revenge, dear Margaret, but of resurrection. My hands trembled slightly as I logged into the banking portal for the first time. $8 million. The number seemed almost abstract until I completed the transfer to my personal account. Then it became real. Real enough to change everything. I'd overheard Eleanor Brooks talking about Lakeview Estates once, dismissing it as new money territory, despite its reputation as the most exclusive community in the area. I smiled as I pulled up the real estate listings. 2 adjacent mansions were available, both with views of the lake. Perfect. The next morning, I walked into the real estate office wearing the same clothes from yesterday. I asked for Paula Rogers, the young agent I remembered being humiliated by Samantha Brooks during my house hunting for Becky. Paula's eyes showed a flicker of recognition, then professionally masked pity at my appearance. I understand you have 2 properties available in Lakeview Estates, I said quietly. Samantha Brooks, who had been eavesdropping from her desk, snickered loudly. Paula, darling, don't waste your time. These houses start at $4 million each. Perhaps we could show her something more suitable. I turned slowly, channeling every ounce of Isabella Harrington's elegant authority. Actually, I'll take both properties. Full asking price, all cash offer, immediate closing. I held up my phone showing the bank balance. I assume that will be sufficient? The office went silent. Paula's eyes widened. Samantha's coffee cup froze halfway to her mouth. I'd like the paperwork started immediately, I continued, my voice steady. And Ms. Brooks? I'll need to speak with your supervisor about your persistent pattern of discriminatory behavior toward clients based on their appearance. I've witnessed it twice now, and I'm sure others have similar stories. But you're a housekeeper," Samantha sputtered. "I was," I corrected her. "A profession I was proud of, by the way. Now I'm a woman buying two of your most expensive properties, and you're someone who's about to learn a valuable lesson about judgment." Within an hour, Samantha was cleared out of her desk. Paula was promoted to lead agent, and I had signed the preliminary paperwork for both houses. As I left the office, I heard whispers starting already. Good. Let them talk. Back in my hotel suite, I opened my laptop again and began researching interior designers. Not the ones Eleanor Brooks would recommend. Instead, I found a talented young woman who'd been rejected from several firms for being too innovative. Her portfolio spoke of someone who understood that homes should reflect their owners' souls, not their social aspirations. As the sun set over Dallas, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, I picked up my phone and saw 6 missed calls from Becky. I deleted them without listening to the messages. Instead, I opened my email and composed a note to the Lakeview Estates Management. Please be advised that Rebecca Brooks is not to be granted entry to the properties or given any information about my residence. Any attempts at contact should be documented and reported directly to me. For the first time in 30 years, I felt no guilt as I pressed send. Some doors needed to stay closed so that others could open. Isabella had taught me that, in her own way, through all those years of quiet observation and carefully chosen words. I ordered another room service meal, this time the most expensive wine on the menu. As I sipped it, watching the city lights twinkle below, I finally understood what Isabella had meant in her final note. Power isn't about having money, Margaret. It's about having the courage to use it to become who you always were, beneath the weight of others' expectations. The news spread through Dallas society like wildfire. A former housekeeper buying 2 mansions in Lakeview Estates wasn't just gossip. It was an earthquake that shook the carefully maintained social hierarchy. I watched it unfold from the peaceful sanctuary of my hotel suite, where I was working with Claire, my newly hired interior designer. "These rooms need to breathe," Claire said, spreading her sketches across the coffee table. "No more hiding in corners or making yourself small." She didn't know how perfectly those words captured my transformation, but I smiled at the synchronicity. That's when the first text from Eleanor Brooks arrived. "Margaret, we need to discuss this unfortunate situation. Becky is absolutely devastated. Surely we can reach some sort of understanding." I was composing a polite but firm non-response when the hotel's front desk called. "Mrs. Foster, there's a delivery for you. A rather large bouquet from Mrs. Rebecca Brooks." I thought of all the times Becky had asked me not to visit her at work, not to mention our relationship to her colleagues, to make myself invisible for her comfort. "Please send a photo of the flowers to this number," I replied, giving them my cell. "Then dispose of them." Minutes later, my phone chimed with an image of an enormous arrangement of white orchids. Becky's calculated choice. Remembering how I once mentioned dreaming of growing orchids, but never having the time or money. Attached was a card. "Mommy, please talk to me. I miss you. Love, your little girl." The old Maggie would have crumbled at those words, would have rushed to comfort her daughter despite everything. But Isabella's voice echoed in my mind. "Manipulation dressed as love is still manipulation, Margaret." I instructed the front desk to send Becky a photo of her expensive orchids in the dumpster. Within an hour, my phone exploded with calls and messages from unknown numbers. Eleanor's friends, Matthew's family members, even their pastor, all trying to mediate the situation. I blocked each number methodically, like pulling weeds from a garden. That evening, as I sat reviewing furniture selections with Claire, the hotel manager appeared at my door. "Mrs. Foster, I apologize for the interruption, but there's a situation in the lobby. Mrs. Brooks is here with a camera crew from Channel 8 News. She's claiming you're having a mental breakdown and she's trying to stage an intervention." I felt an odd sense of calm as I stood, smoothing my new silk blouse, my first purchase from Neiman Marcus. "Please tell them that if they don't leave immediately, my lawyers will be pursuing harassment charges and filing a complaint against the network for participating in stalking." "Already done, ma'am," he smiled. "We've had experience with similar situations. They're being escorted out now. Would you like us to arrange for additional security?" I shook my head, returning to my design meeting. No need. My daughter has always had a flair for dramatic performances, but she also has an intense fear of public embarrassment. She won't risk another scene that could damage her social standing. Later that night, I received an email from Matthews' law firm, attempting to suggest that my sudden wealth must be the result of undue influence from Isabella Harrington. I forwarded it to the legal team I'd retained, a female-owned firm specializing in defending women's financial independence. Their response was swift. "Mrs. Foster, we've documented Ms. Brooks's pattern of financial exploitation and emotional abuse. If they pursue this, we'll be forced to make that pattern public. Shall we send them a gentle reminder of how that might affect their social standing?" I approved the message, then walked to the window of my suite. The Dallas skyline glittered before me, each light a star in a constellation of possibilities. On my phone, a news alert popped up. "Local author announces tell-all book, The Maid Who Stole My Childhood," by Rebekah Brooks. I felt no anger, no hurt, only a deep, settling certainty. Becky had finally shown her true colors, not just to me, but to the world. She thought she was writing my story, but she'd forgotten something crucial. I was no longer a character in her narrative. I opened my laptop and began typing an email to my legal team. "Regarding the upcoming book, let's not try to stop its publication. Sometimes the truth reveals itself best when lies are allowed to speak too loudly." As I pressed send, I caught my reflection in the window, a woman who had stopped apologizing for taking up space in the world. Isabella would have been proud. Morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my newly furnished Lakeview estate home, catching the crystal drops of the chandelier Isabella had left me in her will. Below, Claire and her team were arranging the last pieces of furniture. Not the ostentatious pieces Eleanor Brooks might have chosen, but elegant, comfortable items that invited you to settle in, to stay a while, to finally rest. The grand piano, Isabella's final gift, stood in pride of place in the living room, its polished surface reflecting the lake view. For years, I'd only touched it while dusting. Now, my fingers were slowly remembering the classical pieces I'd learned in the orphanage, playing them in the quiet hours before dawn. "Mrs. Foster?" My new assistant, Sarah, appeared in the doorway. "You might want to see this." She handed me her tablet, open to a morning talk show where Becky sat perched on a cream-colored couch, dabbing at carefully manufactured tears. "I wrote this book to heal," she was saying, her voice trembling perfectly. Growing up, watching my mother choose menial labor over advancement opportunities, seeing her reject help from my father, it shaped my understanding of self-worth. I had to break free from the pattern of martyrdom she created. The host leaned forward sympathetically. "And now she's suddenly wealthy? Suspicious, isn't it?" Becky's voice hardened slightly. After decades of playing the sacrificial servant, she somehow ends up with millions? Meanwhile, I had to fight for everything I achieved, always overshadowed by her performance of poverty. I turned off the tablet, handling it back to Sarah. "Schedule a meeting with the legal team," I said quietly. "Not to fight the book, let her speak. But we need to prepare for what's coming." That afternoon, I had tea in my garden with Maria Rodriguez, our former neighbor who had watched Becky while I worked. She'd aged, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. "I saw her on TV," she said, stirring honey into her cup. "That girl. She doesn't remember the nights you carried her to the emergency room. The birthdays you spent sewing her party dresses by hand because you couldn't afford store-bought ones. She remembers," I replied, watching a hummingbird dart between the roses I'd planted. "She's just rewriting the story to fit who she needs to be now." My phone buzzed with a text from Paula, the real estate agent who'd handled my home purchases. She'd become something of a friend, often bringing me updates about the local real estate market over coffee. "You're trending on Twitter," she wrote. "Becky's book is getting attention. Want me to come over?" "Not today," I replied. "I'm actually preparing for a trip." Indeed, my passport was sitting on my desk upstairs, next to an invitation that had arrived that morning. The International Domestic Workers' Rights Foundation was holding a conference in Barcelona, and they wanted me to speak about financial independence and dignity in domestic work. I hadn't told anyone yet, but I'd been quietly working with a women's advocacy group, setting up a foundation to help domestic workers access education, legal aid, and retirement planning, not out of spite or revenge, but because I understood now what Isabella had tried to teach me. That true generosity comes from strength, not sacrifice. As I walked through my new home that evening, I passed the wall where I'd hung just one photograph, the last picture taken of Isabella and me together, both of us laughing over something now forgotten. Next to it was the space where I used to think I'd hang photos of Becky's future children, my grandchildren. Instead, I'd commissioned a local artist to paint a series of sunrise scenes over water. "Your home should reflect who you're becoming, not who you're leaving behind," Claire had said when we planned the decor. She was right. Upstairs, I opened my laptop to find an email from my publisher. Yes, I had one now, though not for the kind of book Becky was writing. They wanted to know if I'd consider sharing my story, not as a tell-all, but as a guide for women learning to value themselves. "Your silence speaks volumes," they wrote, "but your wisdom could help others find their voice." I closed the laptop without responding. Some stories need time to ripen, like fruit in the sun. For now, I was content letting Becky spin her tales on morning shows while I built something real and lasting. After all, as Isabella once told me, the truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. That night, as I played Chopin on Isabella's piano, watching the moonlight dance on the lake, I felt no desire to defend myself against Becky's accusations. Some battles are won by simply refusing to fight them on another person's terms. The Barcelona Conference Center buzzed with the voices of domestic workers from around the world, their stories echoing against marble floors and soaring ceilings. I sat in the green room, smoothing my navy silk dress, chosen for its simplicity rather than its price tag, and thought about how far I'd come from the woman who used to enter buildings like this through the service entrance. My keynote speech wasn't scheduled until the afternoon, but I'd arrived early to listen to other women share their experiences. That's when I heard a familiar voice in the hallway. "Mrs. Foster? Margaret Foster." I turned to see Carmen Velasquez, who had worked alongside me in the Harrington mansion for 15 years. Behind her stood Maria Chen and Luisa Santos, both former staff members. They'd all found success after Isabella helped them invest their savings, though none quite as dramatically as my story. "We saw the book," Carmen said, her eyes fierce with loyalty. "The things your daughter is saying. We couldn't stay quiet." My heart tightened. "You don't need to—" "Yes, we do," Maria interrupted. "We remember everything. The nights you slept on the mansion's kitchen floor because Becky was in the hospital across town and you couldn't afford the gas to drive home between shifts. The Christmas you sold your mother's ring to buy her. That computer for college applications." Louisa stepped forward. "I remember when she had that heart surgery at age 12. You donated blood, then went straight to work with the bandage still on your arm because you couldn't afford to miss a shift." They shared a look between them, and Carmen spoke again. "We've asked the conference organizers for time to speak, not just about workers' rights, but about you, the real you." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with an urgent message from my legal team. Becky's publishing house was reaching out. There were concerning developments regarding fact-checking for her book. Several former Harrington staff members had come forward with documented evidence contradicting key claims in her manuscript. As I sat there absorbing this news, a young conference organizer rushed in. "Mrs. Foster, the morning sessions, they've gone viral. The real Maggie Foster is trending. Women are sharing stories about you from the Harrington years. And your daughter's publisher just released a statement." I opened my tablet to find the publishing house's official release. "In light of new information and substantial concerns about factual accuracy, we are suspending publication of The Maid Who Stole My Childhood, pending a thorough review." Carmen squeezed my hand. "Isabella always said truth is like water. It finds its own level." As if summoned by those words, more former colleagues began arriving at the conference. Housekeepers, gardeners, kitchen staff from the Harrington estate. Each carried their own memories, their own pieces of the truth. They hadn't come to tear Becky down, but to lift up the reality of who I'd been all those years. A mother who worked with dignity, loved fiercely, and taught them all about resilience through example. During my keynote speech that afternoon, I didn't mention Becky's book once. Instead, I talked about Isabella's legacy. Not the money she'd left me, but the wisdom she'd shared about the difference between serving with dignity and being servile, about how true strength often looks like silence until it doesn't have to anymore. "We who work in other people's homes," I told the packed auditorium, "know that real power isn't in grand gestures or public declarations. It's in showing up every day, doing honest work, and never letting anyone convince you that your labor makes you less worthy of respect." The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes, but it wasn't the applause that moved me to tears. It was watching Carmen, Maria, Louisa, and dozens of other former colleagues standing proudly in their seats, bearing witness to a truth that needed no defense. That evening, as we all gathered for dinner at a small Spanish restaurant, my phone lit up with a message from Becky's publisher. They weren't just suspending the book, they were canceling the contract and demanding full repayment of her advance. Attached was a formal letter requiring her to make a public retraction of her claims. I set the phone aside and listened instead to the women around me sharing stories, laughing, healing old wounds with new understanding. Isabella had been right, again. The truth doesn't need to be defended. Sometimes it just needs to be given time to find its voice through the people who lived it. The morning after I returned from Barcelona, I sat at Isabella's piano, playing Debussy's Clair de Lune, as dawn painted the lake in watercolor hues. My phone had been buzzing constantly with notifications about Becky's increasingly frantic social media posts, each one a new attempt to salvage her crumbling narrative. My mother has turned my entire childhood support system against me, read her latest tweet. She's orchestrated this campaign to destroy my book because she can't handle the truth being exposed. Sarah, my assistant, appeared with my morning tea. Eleanor Brooks is on every morning show that will have her, claiming you've corrupted the domestic worker community with your wealth. She paused, then added, and Matthews' law firm is threatening to sue the former Harrington staff for defamation. I continued playing, letting the gentle notes fill the room. Send a message to our legal team, I said calmly. Tell them to inform Matthews' firm that any legal action against those women will result in me funding their defense and countersuits personally. Also, request that they prepare documentation of every penny I spent on Becky's upbringing. Medical bills, school fees, everything. Are you planning to sue her? Sarah asked. No. I smiled, my fingers never leaving the keys. But sometimes people need to see the math to understand the magnitude of their miscalculation. Later that morning, Paula arrived with fresh croissants and market updates. You won't believe what happened at the real estate office yesterday, she said, settling into one of the comfortable armchairs Claire had chosen. Becky showed up, demanding to know if you'd put your houses on the market yet. She seems convinced your facade of wealth is crumbling. I poured her a cup of tea. And what did you tell her? That not only are you not selling, but you've just approved funding for the Domestic Workers Housing Initiative. Paula grinned. I thought Eleanor Brooks was going to faint when she heard about that at the country club. The housing initiative had been my latest project, purchasing and renovating apartment buildings to provide affordable housing for domestic workers, with built-in financial literacy programs and retirement planning services. It wasn't charity, it was investment in dignity. My phone buzzed with another update. Becky had scheduled a press conference for that afternoon at her house, the same house I'd bought her with my savings. The irony wasn't lost on me. I decided to take a walk through my garden, where the roses Isabella had loved so much were beginning to bloom. As I walked, I dictated an email to Sarah. Please transfer all documentation about Becky's childhood, expenses to the Silent Voices Foundation. They can use it as part of their research on the economic impact of single mothers in domestic work. No names need to be mentioned. The numbers will tell their own story. When I returned inside, Claire was waiting with the final designs for the Foundation's new headquarters. The construction team found something interesting in the old building, she said, unrolling the plans. Behind one of the walls there was a mural from the 1950s, domestic workers standing tall, their faces full of dignity. We thought maybe we could restore it, make it the centerpiece of the main hall. Perfect, I nodded, studying the sketches. Every woman who walks through those doors should see herself reflected in strength, not servitude. That afternoon, I didn't watch Becky's press conference. Instead, I hosted a tea for a group of young domestic workers who were starting their own small businesses. As we sat in my sunlit conservatory, sharing stories and strategies, one of them asked me the question I'd been expecting. Aren't you angry about the book, about your daughter's lies? I looked out at the lake, where a pair of swans glided across the water, leaving gentle ripples in their wake. Anger is expensive, I said finally. It costs you peace, clarity, and the ability to build something new. I'd rather invest my energy in creating spaces where other women can find their worth. My phone lit up with a message from my legal team. Becky's press conference had backfired spectacularly in trying to defend her book. She'd made claims that were easily disproven by hospital records, school documentation, and witness accounts. Her publisher was now considering legal action for breach of contract. But I found I didn't need to read the details. Like Isabella's piano in my living room, some things were more valuable when they made music rather than noise. I turned back to the women in my conservatory and asked about their dreams, their plans, their visions for the future. Let Becky orchestrate her press conferences. I was conducting something far more powerful, a quiet symphony of dignity, opportunity, and grace that would echo long after her accusations had faded into silence. The autumn air carried the scent of chrysanthemums through my open windows. As I reviewed applications for the Silent Voices Foundation's first scholarship program, each story on my desk echoed with familiar notes. Women balancing work and dreams, sacrifice and dignity. A news alert flashed across my tablet. Prominent author Rebekah Brooks faces multiple lawsuits amid book controversy. I set the tablet aside, focusing instead on a particularly moving application from a young woman working as a housekeeper while pursuing her medical degree. The parallel to my own story wasn't lost on me, but neither was the difference. She wouldn't have to do it alone. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her expression carefully neutral. Mrs. Foster, Dr. Eleanor Brooks is here. She doesn't have an appointment, but she insists it's urgent. I thought of all the times I'd stood in doorways like this, waiting for permission to enter rooms in grand houses. Show her to the garden, I said, closing the scholarship folder, and bring us some tea. Eleanor sat stiffly on the terrace, her designer suit at odds with the casual elegance of my garden furniture. She'd aged since I'd last seen her. Worry, lines etching deeper paths around her mouth. Margaret, she began, then stopped, struggling with the unfamiliarity of being the supplicant. The publishing house is suing Becky for the advance. Matthew's firm has lost 3 major clients over his threatened lawsuit against your former colleagues. And now, she twisted her hands in her lap. Now the university is investigating my involvement in the book's claims. I poured tea into delicate cups, Isabella's wedding china, which she'd left to me along with a note. For afternoons when you need to remember your own worth. What do you want from me, Eleanor? Can't you make this go away? Her voice cracked. Call off the lawyers. Tell everyone it was a misunderstanding. Becky's your daughter. I watched a monarch butterfly land on one of my late-blooming roses. No, I said quietly. I can't make the truth go away, and I won't try. She's suffering, Eleanor pressed. Her reputation is experiencing the natural consequences of her choices, I finished. Just as I experienced the natural consequences of mine. All those years I chose to put her first. Sarah appeared with a folder, the latest update from the foundation. The first housing complex is ready, she announced. 20 units, all filled with domestic workers pursuing education or starting businesses. The waiting list for the next building is already full. Eleanor's eyes darted between me and the folder. You're really not going to help her. After everything. I set my teacup down carefully. I am helping her, Eleanor, by letting her face the reality of her actions. I'm giving her the chance to learn what I learned too late. That dignity isn't inherited or borrowed. It's earned through the choices we make when no one's watching. The press is calling it a modern Cinderella story in reverse, she said bitterly. The servant becoming the queen, while the princess falls from grace. I stood, smoothing my skirt. No, this isn't a fairy tale about revenge or reversal of fortune. It's a story about women learning to value themselves. Some learn through building, others up, some through the painful lesson of trying to tear others down. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a message from Carmen. She'd just been appointed director of hospitality at a major hotel chain, the first former domestic worker to hold the position. She credited the foundation's leadership program for giving her the confidence to apply. "You know," I said to Eleanor, "when Isabella left me her fortune, I thought it was about the money, but she was giving me something far more valuable. The opportunity to show that true worth isn't in what you own or what you claim. It's in what you build for others." I walked her to the door, where her driver waited. As she turned to leave, she hesitated. "The university's ethics board. They're using your story in their curriculum now. Something about the intersection of privilege, narrative ownership, and moral responsibility." I smiled. "Then perhaps some good will come from all of this after all." That evening, as I practiced a new piece on the piano, Sarah brought in a final piece of mail, a letter from a domestic workers' union in Barcelona. They were naming their new educational fund after me, not because of my wealth or my story, but because of what I'd chosen to do with both. I placed the letter next to a framed photo of Isabella and returned to the piano. Outside, the sunset painted the lake in shades of gold and purple, while somewhere in the city, my daughter was learning the hardest lesson of all, that the stories we tell about ourselves must match the truth of how we live. Winter came early to Dallas that year, bringing with it unexpected changes. I stood at my bedroom window watching the rare Texas snow dust, the lake's surface, when Sarah brought in the morning's news summary. The headlines were surprisingly personal. Silent Voices Foundation launches national program, and domestic workers' rights bill gains momentum after Foster initiative. But it was a smaller headline, tucked away in the local section, that caught my eye. Brooks family home listed for sale following financial setbacks. "Becky and Matthew are divorcing," Sarah added quietly. "The legal fees and reputation, damage. Apparently it was too much for their marriage." I let the papers rest on my desk, next to an invitation to speak at Harvard Business School about ethical wealth management and social responsibility. The irony wasn't lost on me. Eleanor's former academic kingdom now wanted to learn from the very woman she'd once dismissed as the help. My phone chimed with a message from Paula. "Thought you should know. Becky's trying to sell the house you bought her. Market's down, and they're underwater on their second mortgage." I picked up my tablet and opened the banking app, but then stopped myself. The old Maggie would have rushed to rescue Becky, to solve her problems, to smooth her path. But Isabella's voice echoed in my memory. Sometimes love means letting people find their own way. Instead, I focused on the day's real work. The foundation was expanding, opening offices in 5 new cities. We'd just launched a partnership with major hotels to create career advancement programs for housekeeping staff. Carmen was leading the initiative, transforming her years of experience into opportunities for others. "Mrs. Foster?" Sarah appeared, again. "The documentary crew is here for the Foundation's feature, and the women from the first housing complex want to show you something before the filming starts." I drove to our original apartment building, now a thriving community of domestic workers pursuing their dreams. In the common room, 20 women waited with barely contained excitement. Maria Chen, now our housing program director, stepped forward. "We've been saving," she announced, "pooling our resources like you taught us. We made an offer on the empty building next door. We want to turn it into a child care center for working mothers." My throat tightened as they showed me their business plan, their budget, their vision for the future. These women weren't asking for a handout. They were creating their own opportunities, just as I had done with Isabella's gift. We'll need some guidance, Maria admitted. But we learned from watching you. Money isn't just about wealth. It's about creating ripples of change. As the documentary crew filmed their story, I noticed one of the younger women looking troubled. During a break, she approached me hesitantly. "My employer showed me an online post," she said. "Your daughter. She's selling her house. She says she's going to end up homeless." She paused, then added, "My mother used to manipulate me the same way, using guilt as a weapon." I squeezed her hand gently. "And how did you learn to handle it?" I realized I couldn't keep sacrificing my future to protect her from the consequences of her choices. The wisdom of her words stayed with me as I drove home through the snowy evening. At a red light, I saw a billboard for a new self-help book, The Price of Dignity, by Dr. Eleanor Brooks. The subtitle read, "A Personal Journey of Recognition and Redemption." I smiled, remembering Isabella's words. "Change happens in circles, Margaret. When one woman stands in her truth, she gives others permission to find theirs." That night, as I played the piano in my quiet house, Sarah brought me one final document to sign. The Foundation's new initiative to provide legal support for domestic workers facing workplace discrimination. As I read through the proposal, I realized something profound. Becky's attempts to destroy my reputation had instead created a platform for systemic change. The snow continued to fall outside, transforming the landscape into something new and clean. Tomorrow, the Foundation would announce its biggest project yet, a nationwide network of education and employment resources for domestic workers. But tonight, in the peaceful solitude of my home, I felt gratitude for every step of my journey, even the painful ones. They had all led me here, to this moment, where I could finally understand that the greatest act of love isn't sacrifice. It's showing others how to stand in their own power. Spring arrived with a burst of Texas wildflowers and unexpected news. I was in my garden planning the layout for a new meditation space when Sarah brought out a thick envelope bearing the seal of the governor's office. "They want to award you the State Medal for Social Impact," she explained, watching me read the letter. The ceremony would coincide with the signing of the Domestic Workers' Rights Act. I set the letter beside my gardening tools, thinking of how Isabella would have appreciated the symmetry. The former housekeeper being honored in the same ceremony that would help protect future generations of domestic workers. "There's something else," Sarah added hesitantly. "Becky's real estate agent reached out. The house. They're facing foreclosure. She's asked if you'd consider buying it back, letting her stay on as a tenant." A monarch butterfly landed on one of my newly planted lavender bushes, its wings catching the morning light. I thought of all the times I'd caught Becky when she was falling, how my sacrifices had only taught her to expect rescue rather than resilience. Pass the information to the Foundation, I decided. The house could work for our transitional housing program, helping domestic workers who are pursuing advanced education or starting businesses. Sarah smiled, understanding the poetry of the choice. "And Becky's request? Send her the Foundation's standard housing application form. She can apply like anyone else." Later that morning, I had a video call with Carmen and the Foundation's board to discuss our expanding programs. The first class of scholarship recipients was graduating. Nurses, teachers, business owners, all rising from the domestic work sector. Our housing initiatives had spread to 3 more states, and the leadership program was being studied by universities as a model for economic empowerment. "We've had an unusual application," Carmen mentioned near the end of the call. "Eleanor Brooks wants to volunteer as a mentor in our education program. She says her experience with recent events has changed her perspective on privilege and dignity. I thought of Eleanor's new book, which had surprised everyone by being an honest examination of her own prejudices rather than another attack. If she's willing to go through the same training as other mentors, accept her, I said. Change deserves space to grow. That afternoon, I had tea with Paula, who'd recently opened her own real estate agency focused on helping working-class families navigate homeownership. The success of her business was another ripple effect of standing up to Samantha Brooks's discrimination months ago. You know what I realized? Paula said, stirring honey into her tea. Your daughter tried to write a story about how you stole her childhood, but instead she revealed how you're helping countless other children have better futures through their mother's empowerment. I was about to respond when Sarah hurried in with breaking news on her tablet. The publishing house that had canceled Becky's book was announcing a new series focused on women's economic empowerment with the Silent Voices Foundation as a partner. The first book would feature stories of domestic workers who had transformed their lives through education and entrepreneurship. They want you to write the foreword, Sarah said. I walked to Isabella's piano, running my fingers along its polished surface. No, I replied. Ask Carmen to write it, or Maria, or any of the women who are building their dreams right now. This isn't about my story anymore. It's about all of our stories. As evening approached, I received an unexpected email from Matthew's law firm. He was resigning from his partnership position, citing a desire to focus on pro bono work with labor rights organizations. Attached was a personal note. Your dignity in the face of our accusations taught me more about ethics than any law school course. I sat at the piano, playing the piece I'd been practicing for the governor's ceremony. Through the windows, I could see the foundation's new headquarters being built across the lake. A modern building with the restored 1950s mural of domestic workers as its centerpiece. A text arrived from one of our scholarship recipients. Just got accepted to medical school. You showed me that our past jobs don't define our future dreams. I smiled, thinking of Isabella's words in her final letter to me. True legacy isn't in what we leave behind, but in what we inspire others to build. The sun set over the lake, painting the sky in shades of possibility as I continued playing, each note a testament to the power of choosing dignity over vengeance, growth over grievance, and the quiet strength of leading by example. The the morning of my 60th birthday dawned clear and bright over Lake Wisteria. I'd decided to spend it in my new home in Tennessee, a modest but elegant chalet surrounded by roses and wisteria, far from the Dallas society that had once seemed so important to Becky. The lakeside property felt like a gift from Isabella, though she'd never known about it. She'd taught me that peace wasn't found in grand mansions, but in spaces that reflected your true self. I'd sold the Lakeview estate houses during the real estate boom, using the profits to expand the foundation's work. The buyers were two families of former domestic workers, one a scholarship recipient who'd become a successful surgeon, the other a group of sisters who'd built a thriving cleaning company. They'd earned those homes in a way that meant more than any inheritance could. Sarah had arranged a small gathering of close friends for the afternoon. Carmen, Maria, Paula, and others who'd been part of my journey. But first, I had my morning ritual, playing the piano as the sun rose over the water. As I sat at Isabella's piano, now perfectly at home in this more intimate space, I found myself reflecting on the past 2 years. The foundation's work had exceeded everyone's expectations. Our programs had helped over 1,000 women transition, from domestic work to business ownership or professional careers. The housing initiatives had spread nationwide, and our advocacy had helped pass workers' rights legislation in 12 states. But it was the smaller changes that moved me most. Last week, I'd received a letter from Eleanor Brooks, now a regular volunteer in our mentorship program. She wrote about how working with domestic workers' children had transformed her understanding of privilege and opportunity. Her ethics course at the university now included a section on domestic workers' rights. Matthew had found his calling. In labor law, representing workers in discrimination cases, he'd written a formal apology for his role in threatening to sue my former colleagues, and now offered free legal clinics at our foundation centers. And Becky. I opened the morning's mail to find a thick envelope bearing her handwriting. Inside was a copy of her new book, self-published and humble, Learning Dignity, A Daughter's Journey Back to Truth. The dedication page read, "To my mother, who taught me that true love sometimes means letting someone find their own way back to themselves." I set the book aside without opening it further. Perhaps someday I'd read it, but today wasn't about the past. Today was about celebrating how far we'd all come. Later, as my friends gathered on the lakeside terrace, I watched Carmen's daughter playing the piano. She was studying at Juilliard now, thanks to one of our scholarships. Maria's granddaughter was heading to medical school in the fall. Paula had just opened her third real estate office, focused on helping domestic workers achieve home ownership. "You know what the best part is?" Carmen said, joining me at the railing. "None of these young women will ever have to choose between dignity and survival." The afternoon sun painted the lake in shades of gold as I looked out at these remarkable women, former housekeepers and nannies who now ran businesses, owned homes, sat on boards. They weren't successful because I'd given them anything. They'd succeeded because they'd been given the space and support to recognize their own worth. As the sun began to set, I sat at the piano one last time that day. The piece I played was one Isabella had loved, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. Its gentle notes floated across the water, carrying with them the wisdom of my journey. That true power lies not in wealth or status, but in the choice to rise with dignity and lift others as you climb. Sarah brought me a final piece of mail, an invitation to speak at the United Nations about domestic workers' rights. But more meaningful was the small note that fell out with it from a young housekeeper in Barcelona. "You taught us that our work doesn't define our worth. Our worth defines our work." Looking out at the twilight settling over Lake Wisteria, I thought about the long path that had led me here. I'd lost a daughter but gained a family of sisters. I'd given up mansions but found a true home. I'd stepped away from a story of sacrifice and into one of strength. The wisteria bloomed in cascading purple waves, its sweet scent mingling with the roses Isabella had loved so much. In the end, she'd given me far more than money. She'd shown me that sometimes the most powerful choice a woman can make is to finally, quietly, completely choose herself. And in that choice, I'd found not just peace, but purpose. Not just freedom, but fulfillment. Not just survival, but triumph. The lake reflected the first stars of evening as I closed the piano, ready to join my chosen family for dinner. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to create change. But tonight, in this moment, I was simply grateful for every step of the journey, even the painful ones that had led me home to myself. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Give it a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video!